coming into the new bike season, and come Monday morning I was all set to do some filming for some camping equipment that I've had for quite a while. And I got up early as I usually do, switched on my computer and started going through messages, emails, comments that I'd missed over the weekend. Now there's two requests for information that are constantly coming up. In fact, ever since I started doing the videos on the T120 2 years ago, they've been a common factor in comments, and that is people asking me how tall I am. Now I'll come to that later on, because there's another question popping up more and more recently relating to which model Bonneville people should buy. And I think what it boils down to is the current Bonneville range has grown to such a ridiculous extent that people are just downright confused by which model they want. And it's little wonder, because every time you blink, someone at Triumph has got up early one morning and thought, Bonnevilles are going well. We haven't brought a new Bonneville out for a little while. Let's do that today. Not counting the latest factory Triumph customs. I think there's something like 13 or 14 models currently sitting in the modern classics Triumph Bonneville range. So there's little wonder that the prospective bike buyer is a bit confused about which of those Bonnevilles he actually wants. Now, since last year, I've been feeling increasingly more uneasy over what Triumph are doing with these bikes. And I'm not making this video to ruffle any feathers, but in a conversation on Messenger over the weekend, a subscriber to this channel hit the nail on the head. It was something that I've been thinking for a long time, only I thought I was the only one thinking it. And he told me that the problem with the current Bonneville range is that it's just a collection of factory parts bin specials. And he was right. With the exclusion of the bobbers and the bobber derived Speedmaster, they are all basically the same bike, the same frame, the same engine, with just a collection of bolt-on off-the-shelf parts to make them look, and in some respects perform, in different ways. The clue is in the name. They're all Bonnevilles. They're all just derivatives of the same bike. Now, I had a really good think, and I can't think of any motor vehicle manufacturer, with the possible exclusion of some commercial vehicles, that has ever gone down this route to this extent. And like I've said, it makes me feel unsettled, because there's a parallel in history here where things eventually went horribly wrong, and I hope that I'm wrong. Now, you only have to look back to the 1960s and the gradual demise of the British bike building industry. Triumph, Norton, Villiers and BSA were all basically the same company that merged. There was pressure from the Japanese bike industry that were introducing complete from the ground up redesigned models every couple of years, and the British bike manufacturing market was shrinking. Now, for decades, the British bike industry had had the world market pretty much to themselves, and the bike factories basically had just become cash cows for the shareholders. There was no real development going on, and each bike model had remained pretty much unchanged for 10 or 15 years. Now, shareholders didn't want to give up the huge dividends they were reaping in every year by spending more money developing new models. So this factory parts bin special mentality crept into British bike manufacturing. They would take mudguards from a BSA or a Norton and stick them on a Bonneville, change the colour scheme a bit, do the same with various other aspects of the bike, and call it a new model. But it wasn't a new model, it was the same model they've been making for 10 or 15 years. They just stuck some new parts on it to make it look different. They relied on customer loyalty to keep that manufacturing industry going. But year on year, as those customers watched what the Japanese manufacturers were coming out with bikes of a quality and performance that were improving in leaps and bounds year on year, that customer loyalty gradually dissolved, until all that was really left from that great British bike building empire was the Triumph Bonneville. Triumph became a national embarrassment. It was bailed out by the government. It took the money and it continued down exactly the same path. There'd been absolutely no investment gone into that model, that one model that was left, for over 20 years. And although many of you are perhaps too young to remember it, or have maybe just never been that interested to look into it, the Triumph Bonneville by the late 1970s was just a big biking joke. Now, the Workers' Cooperative took Triumph over in the early 1980s with a little bit of half-hearted help from the government, but the writing was on the wall. By then, the Triumph Bonneville had such a bad reputation for quality control issues and reliability that they quite simply couldn't give them away. Then Mr. Blow stepped in. He bought the factory, he bought the rights, he demolished the factory and built houses on the site, and a decade later opened up a new factory in Hinckley and started producing Triumphs. The biking world was a bit sceptical about this because they'd seen promises of the Triumph name being resurrected so many times, and each time it had failed to deliver. And I actually remember back in the early 1990s reading in one of the bike magazines of an interview with Mr. Blower. And he was asked about the Bonneville, and he openly admitted that the Bonneville name had such a stigma attached to it that it was doubtful that the new Triumph factory would ever produce another Bonneville. And it was in fact another decade before they decided to dip the toes in it and see whether that stigma had dissipated enough to make the Bonneville viable. Now, for the next 20 years, the new Triumph Motorcycles Limited gradually grew from strength to strength, taking bikes out of the Japanese market. A phoenix, if you like, rose from the ashes. The Bonneville was reintroduced and in fact was a great success. And for 15 years that air called Bonneville gradually earned respect and reinstated itself as a force to be reckoned with in the motorcycle market. And in 2015, when the water-cooled version was announced, it was certainly looking like Triumph couldn't do anything wrong. But let's put things into perspective. Triumph is a tiny company. I think we all get a bit blinkered by our loyalty and our love for this mark. But if you compare it to the likes of BMW or any of the big Japanese four, it's a bit like comparing the Walmart empire to a pop-up market stall. Triumph isn't a big company. Now, at first, the water-cooled twins looked fantastic. They are fantastic. The three initial models that were introduced in quick succession to each other, the Street Twin, the T120 and the Thruxton, were all great bikes and were all really well received. But Triumph didn't stop there. They're not a company that in the first place had a great reputation for customer care, and quite often warranty claims on these bikes is an uphill struggle for the customer. Now, that wouldn't be so bad if these bikes rarely go wrong, but they do seem to have more than the fair share of faults. There's been numerous recalls for faults that are potentially dangerous, and Triumph have been less than forthcoming with the problems with water getting into the instrument pods and that god-awful problem with the squealing front brakes on the T120. I'm still getting regular contact with people who are battling it out with Triumph to get that brake squealing issue sorted out. It's been 3 years now, but we still have dealerships insisting that they don't know about the issue. Now, to my mind, Triumph for the last 3 years should have been concentrating on getting that area of their business right, but instead they've just knocked out a quick succession of derivative models from the Bonneville, bikes that seem to have been rushed to the marketplace without the proper development. And this, for me, is where the worry and concern is starting to creep in. I've got a lot invested in the Triumph Bonneville, both on this channel and in my garage, but I'm starting to feel a little bit embarrassed by the whole thing. I can't help but draw a parallel with those days gone by. Triumph seems to be walking down the same garden path that the old Triumph did, charging high prices and relying on customer loyalty without really giving anything back in return. And when people ask me my opinions on these bikes and which bike they should choose, I quite simply don't know what to say to them. I'm going to be quite honest here. The last few Bonneville models that Triumph have turned out, I've not really bothered watching the reviews, because what immediately registers in my mind is, oh, it's just another Bonneville in a dress-up kit. Because in reality, that is all they are. They all have the same engines but in different states of tune in an attempt to give them a different character or personality. They're all borrowing parts from each other. And what parts haven't been borrowed are simply off-the-shelf parts made by proprietary manufacturers. In essence, it seems to me that Triumph are doing exactly what Triumph did 40 or 50 years ago. It seems to me that they've adopted the iPhone marketing model and applied it to motorcycles. They're not continuing to develop the Bonneville or improve it, they're just changing cosmetic details and calling it a new model. And my fear is that they're spreading the Bonneville name too thin, and this is having a knock-on effect in the second-hand market. There's a glut of second-hand Bonnevilles sitting on showroom floors, and second-hand residual values of these water-cooled twins is not holding up anywhere near as well as the old AC twins did. BMW was in danger of treading this same path, and then last year realised the mistake. In one fell swoop, they cancelled several models that were in development of the R9T and then thinned out the existing model range because they realised it wasn't sustainable. There are already rumours in the trade that Triumph are about to do the same thing with some of the Bonneville models, with rumours that some of them are about to be axed. And it'll be interesting to see what direction Triumph takes over the next 12 months. So the only advice I can give is think carefully about what you want from a bike and then choose the bike that fits the function you want from it in the dress-up kit that you prefer, at the budget level you can afford. Now, as for this height thing, I'm 6 feet tall, and so I've been told I'm built like a brick outhouse. People seem to have this preoccupation as to whether they're too tall for a bike. And it certainly doesn't help that motorcycle manufacturers tend to choose average to short people to feature in all their advertising media to make the bike look big. But I know where people are coming from. I've had my fair share of comments over the last 2 years from half-wits telling me that I'm too big for that motorbike and I should have got this bike or I should have got that bike. My advice to you is ignore that beta male mentality. So long as you can physically ride that bike and that bike is comfortable for you, it doesn't matter how tall you are. I don't care how I appear to other people when I'm riding my bike. I don't buy the bike for them or to please them. I buy the bike to please me. And all you should really be concerned about is how that bike makes you feel when you're riding it. That is all that matters. Now, please don't take away from this video the idea that I'm just having one big moan about Triumph. That's not what it is. It's an expression of concern as to where they're heading with the Bonneville. There are far too many different Bonneville models in production. Quality control isn't where it should be, and this is affecting me and you, the new Bonneville owners, when it comes to putting our bikes on the second-hand market. The Triumph Bonneville is a historic and iconic motorcycling name, a name that I love and take a lot of pride in being involved with. I quite simply don't want to see that name become the butt of jokes and rebuke as it did back in the late 70s, early 1980s. Now I think I better leave this video at that. Once again, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you have, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back on Friday and I'll try to get the filming done for that bit of camping equipment I was talking about earlier on. So until then, ride carefully and I'll see you soon.